Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. So I would like to do one thing before talk about individual technologies and what the resultant is when we put those together. First thing I'd like to do, though, is take an opportunity to show that we are not just a telephone company. A lot of people, when they ask me, who do I work for, I say Ericsson. They always say, oh, Sony Ericsson. No, it's not anymore. That's about a year ago we sold that off back to Sony. And we've always been much, much more than just radio infrastructure. We have a lot of business in radio infrastructure, of course, $17 billion worth of business, which is significant. But we have $15 billion in services. And we have, over the past few years, been accumulating more and more of that. And in fact, we run a lot of operations around the world. ITV in the UK, for instance, is actually run by us. A lot of this is through acquisitions going all the way back to the year 2000. But clearly, we are much more than just a radio access network technology provider. And these are the kind of heavyweight operators around the world that we actually have a very deep engagement with. We haven't quite finished the acquisition of Red Bee, which also runs the BBC in the UK, and that's going through some regulatory processes right now, but we hope that'll be completed relatively shortly. So we have this vision of a network society. Anything that can use an IP connection will have an IP connection. Many of those things will not be anything that humans touch. They'll be in your car, in your fridge, in various things. But by the year 2020, we reckon there's going to be something like 50 billion devices out there, of which a good 15 billion will be actually video enabled. So that's that's actually ahead, of course, of the population. But you've already seen in the world of radio, in cell phones rather, how many countries already are way past 100% penetration. So we expect the same thing. So this is the challenge. How can we get to this and service a network that's going to provide the kind of consumption experience that people are going to demand? So what we've tried to do over the years is, and this is freely available, by the way. The website there I put up there is actually a year out of date. We do it every year. We just released the 2013 report. So, but just like you've got sources of information, you can rely on. Cisco, for instance, do a great report every year on the state of the network. We do one from the consumer's perspective and what's happening to the consumer and how their tastes are changing. We all know that our working week is no longer a 40-hour week, right? We never know when we actually start work or when we finish. We're pretty much on the clock all the time. That means the way we entertain and socialize is also changing. And this is part of the things that we're trying to study in the Consumer Labs report every year. And this is one of the things that we found, that 67% are using tablets at the same time. And we'll come on to some interesting date lines in this in a minute. We've got 60% watch video on demand of one sort or another. The last time I looked, 14 petabytes per month was being distributed just from the BBC in their iPlayer. And the ITV have their players, and different players are coming all around the world from the broadcasters, producing a much greater on-demand experience. 41% of consumers will pay for HD television, and once you've gone to HD, you never go back. We recently at IBC, which is a big show in Amsterdam, just 2 weeks ago, we showed a live rugby game from Twickenham in London, and it was in 4K. And it was really interesting because we had the guys at the other end on the phone, and they realized that to shoot 4K television, which was wonderful to watch. Some of the close-ups of the scars and the bleeding wasn't too funny, but the actual game itself was mesmerizing to watch in that amount of detail. But what we found, and the producers found, is that they had to change the way the production was done. Just like we found in the little experiment that kind of came and went with 3D, the 4K television, which I think is going to persist, It does require different production things, such as you cannot now go to the 2-second edits. You can't continually change the shots like you do in conventional television. You have to give the viewer the chance to scan, just like they would do in a crowd. If they were sitting there in the bleachers, they would be scanning, and that's what you do watching it. Fascinating. I found myself watching people in the audience, actually in the crowd, doing various things, whereas I normally would just be focused on the center of the game. Anyway, so HD, the quality, and that increasing quality is going to persist. 16% of people are no longer using their DVRs as much. Interesting. Why is that? Because it's in the cloud. Now, more operators are putting that stored video content in the cloud. There's also these players I talked about. It's tending to cause a reduction in DVR usage. This report is freely available. I'd encourage you to go look at it. And there's a nice summary right there. It's about 10, 12 pages. It's fascinating to see how it's moved year upon year. So, given that, is this working? Yes, there we go. One of the things we found in the past, looking back probably when the IMTC was originally formed, we used to say to ourselves, what's on right now? We'd actually pick up a paper or find some means of identifying what can we watch right now, scan, and then choose. To the point where now we feel like, what do we want to watch right now? This is where the impulse is for us to be able to get on-demand content. Okay, it might have started 7 minutes ago, but I want to see it start right now. And then an interesting phenomenon over the past few years is, who else is watching it right now? How can I find out? This is where the second screen comes in. My friends, what are they doing? What are they doing? What do they think about particular content? Do they have recommendations in my circle of friends? Interesting transition. All of this means that we've got a real transition to IP unicast, which is going to place tremendous strains on all forms of networks. 3 dates. Any guesses as to what those 3 dates were? They were very important in the mind of a man called Steve Jobs. The first one was when he put out the very first iPod. Second one was the iPhone, which was a game changer. I mean, the first one was definitely shook the tree a little bit. The second one really shook the tree. And the third one, the iPad, just 3 years ago, turned that tree upside down. Now, I remember when the iPad came out, and I thought, what on earth does anybody want an iPhone that size for? Because functionally, it was identical. You couldn't put it to your ear and listen to it. It didn't have anything like that. And then I started watching video on it, and it became part of my everyday life. So all these market drivers that I've just described, the 6 here, and the one I want to start is the explosion of video traffic delivered by IP, and what it's going to mean to the technologies I'm going to describe that brings it into this world. More of that traffic going unicast. So HTML5 is a very key part of that. Interesting when you look at it, again, I think starting probably back when IMTC was being formed, the original HTML4 was being put together. It was 1994, and I think it wasn't until 97 that it was actually standardized. That's a long time for a standard, and clearly it showed its age as we started delivering video over IP. And the good thing about it is that HTML5 has been carefully crafted to have the video and audio and various other parts of a multimedia format put as essential ingredients. And if you look at those elements, you have video and audio tags, you've got the source track and canvas tags, all of which enables you to really manipulate the video, just like you have found ways in the past to manipulate text and graphics in the old HTML4 days. This allows you to really deliver and manipulate the video content being put on there. And there's some great sources of information, by the way, in w3.org. They have some great some research material and some great descriptions of these new elements and what it means and the differences between the two. So if you look at the support for that, and you can see one critical area here is where Firefox has been very widely take up, especially among younger users. And you can see how it has wavered a little bit on its use of H.264, 4 I put in there. But it does now, it actually has, with a plugin, it does have the ability to be part of a Firefox browsing experience. And it's starting to be embraced both in the video, in terms of H.264, MP4, and also in AAC. Both of those are interesting. But the other browsers clearly are fully supportive, Internet Explorer especially, of AAC and H.264. So if we look at other elements inside this ecosystem, what the technologies there are, there's a continued drive for better codecs of one sort or another. And we talked, I think, a little bit earlier on about some of those codecs. And there's also a whole new area, which is how we put intelligence into the content delivery networks. More and more intelligent caching. When you actually go and download to your iPad or to your Android device, there is a whole lot of intelligence starting to be put into the way that is being delivered to you. For instance, one of the things that we found is that a lot of video gets switched off. Basically, people abandon fairly quickly, and yet the CDN is still full of the request, and it's a lot of waste in those CDNs. Now, intelligent pacing is coming, and it's going to make the whole of the infrastructure groan a little less loudly when this tsunami of video IP is coming over it. But today, I'm not going to be able to have time to talk about the CDN side, but just know that it's a key element. So in the better codecs side of things, I was, I think as you heard, a president of the MPEG Industry Forum. For a while there, we had a battle between some proprietary codecs, of which the Windows Media was the predominant one. Windows Media 9 became VC 9, became VC 1. Anyway, at the end of the day, the triumphant, I guess, if you can call it that, codec to replace MPEG-2 was H.264. And it's now widely adopted in hundreds of millions of devices, and silicon now is down at the same price as an MPEG-2 silicon. In fact, many devices do both codecs. So what happened in 2004, we started looking at what's next. And HEVC became a contender, following the same thing, a joint effort between two organizations, between MPEG and VSEG, basically ITU and the equivalent. And the idea was to create a codec that has 50% better performance. And it was based on the fact that silicon had moved on so far over those intervening years. And it's now referred to as H.265, and this year it was fully ratified. We actually at Ericsson, I mean, in quite a gutsy move, we actually launched an H.265 HEVC encoder last year at IBC 2012. And it has a number of profiles, as you can see here. And one of the key things for me is the 10-bit profiles. I don't know if ever you've seen one of these large screens, especially the 4K screens, showing something like a sunset, but you'll see in 8-bit, which is the conventional way that color is represented, you'll see color banding. And that color banding is not a good user experience. Going to 10-bit allows you to get rid of that. And given that HEVC is one of the key enabling things for 4K television in the future, HEVC 10 is a key profile to keep your eyes on. We were promised 50% when we started this work, and we got it. We got it especially on the higher end, in the higher data rates. The lower data rates, especially in some of the mobile areas, we get less than that. But it is now performing very well as a codec. And we're seeing, in this case, we're using PSNR. Sorry about that. I know we talked about MOS and all the different ones. But this was just showing one example of the measurements we've got, that we're getting a good result out of the codec. This is the way in which we see the adoption timeline. And the first one is in the smaller devices. The smaller devices, such as the Snapdragon chip from Qualcomm, going into a lot of the new smartphones, has this capability built in. It also has some, we'll come on to in a minute, some MPEG-DASH capability as well. And then this progresses through all these different adoption scenarios. But this is just a good, I think, a roadmap for you to take away so you can see as we go over the next few years how HEVC is going to become as dominant in its presence as H.264 has over the past 5 years. So this last mile that we're talking about, the delivery of this, has got some challenges with unicast traffic especially. And there's a drive for adaptive delivery because one of the things we all hate with a passion is when the picture stops and you get buffering. So one of the things that we can do about that is to get, in the interest of time, I won't go through all these use cases. I'll get straight to the fact that adaptive streaming can eliminate that. You basically, in adaptive streaming, you can have multi-bit rate encoding, so you have the same asset being encoded at different bit rates. You have stateless servers, which means you don't have any session control needing to be set up. There's a very simple way of doing it. It has standard internet protocols, so it traverses firewalls very well because it's HTTP, opens the right ports, which are common, and it has client intelligence, which knows how much the client can actually use, how even down to the point where if the memory is on the device is coming out, it will actually go to a lower bit rate encoding. But let me show you how it works. So given an asset, right, which is a series of frames, it gets encoded at a particular data rate, let's say 2 megabits per second. We'll also take that same asset and encode it at 1 megabit per second, and again, say at 384. Is that saying? I can't read my own writing there. Anyway, that's 3 separate files. And now those files, in order for it to be selected in an adaptive loop, have to be segmented into chunks. And the chunk size vary depending on which particular adaptive bitrate technology you use. And those chunks are then referenced into a manifest file that has all the URIs in one place so that the client device can choose which one to use. So those manifest files also have inside it representations. I won't go into too much detail, again, in the interest of time. But then that's all put together and transmitted back to the client, and the client then selects. The client will select the particular data rate that it can use given the conditions of a varying user interface. So if all of a sudden you go into a congested cell in a radio access network, it will drop down to a lower data rate, but you won't get freeze framing, you won't get this rebuffering. And you'll see a momentary loss of resolution. But if you have an immersive kind of experience going, say it's the World Cup, say it's a rugby game from Twickenham, or something like the Super Bowl, you won't even notice the fact that it's momentarily lost resolution, and the experience will continue to go. And the other thing that's nice about this, and this is where the monetization rules come in, it's also by doing what's called manifest manipulation, you can now insert advertising in a very intelligent way. You can now target down to the IP address of particular ads that are being put into a particular stream. So it is, as I said, adapting to available network conditions. It has very, very good interfaces and ability to work with CDNs and the firewalls. Its intelligence is in the client, so the client is all the one deciding which one it's doing, and it's really unifying the on-demand network capacity. In other words, what the network operator can do, instead of having to always size his network for peak demands, it can do the sizing based on average demands. And it adapts, as I said, well to targeted advertising. So if you look at adaptive TV history, you can see it's come quite a long way. All the way back from 3GPP, where we, Ericsson, were working, trying to work away. We saw the fact that now radio access networks were getting to a point where they could carry video. And now, of course, with LTE, it's gone beyond that. So all kinds of initiatives going on. HLS from Apple, smooth streaming from Microsoft, Adobe had the HDS, and all vying for each other in terms of what they could do. What the industry doesn't need is a fragmented base like this with 4 separate ways of doing the same thing. And we in the MPEG-DASH industry forum, which I'm on the board of, have been trying our hardest to get all the players to come over to work in one standard. Now, with the exception of Apple, we have been successful. Adobe have committed to taking Flash and making that become Dash compliant. Microsoft last year confirmed at NAB that they were going to do the same thing, and so has Google. Apple is a holdout, and I don't see them ever really coming over to this new standard. So I think we're inevitably going to live in a world where we're going to have two adaptive streaming technologies running side by side. But when you look at that, if you had the four of them going at the same time, you'd have so much of a mess. Already, Discovery, for instance, has to put 42 different profiles out of a particular content that it gets in, say, from one of its producers. So in the Dash Industry Forum, which again I would encourage you to go to that website, dashif.org, we have produced a very good way of navigating your way through all this. It also defines one particular standard subset. Dash itself is a very big and very wide standard. And as a result, we've had to define a subset, which is called H.264, and another one which is called H.265 for the two different codecs. But it's a subset which we're coming and working with IMTC on interop. We've actually got a liaison statement with IMTC that's specifically addressing that. Also, the differences between the two types, the Apple world and the Dash world, is well explained in that website. Again, it's on this slide. I won't go into the details. It's on this one. There's also a very good comparison. Bottom line of this is that the file format in Dash lends itself to common encryption, which it lends itself to much better business models. And it's an international standard. Implementation, again, in the interest of time, I'll run through this very quickly. Transcoding and then segmenting, and then you serve it out over the CDN. So finally, what I'd like to leave you with is that all these technologies are coming together. HEVC, H.265, MPEG-DASH with HTML5, the MDNs, the LTEs, they're all coming together to produce a much better user experience. And I've left you this, I won't go into this, but these are the conclusions that I've drawn from the fact that this convergence is happening right now. Thank you.